They say you learn who your family really is at a funeral. I didn't expect to learn it in a lawyer's office, with my father barely cold in the ground. Before we start, hit that subscribe button if you love true-style family revenge stories like this one. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own family betrayed you like mine did? The office smelled like old wood and polished regret. Sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds, striping the long oak table where we sat. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue, though she hadn't shed a tear at the burial. My brother Jake, on the other hand, wore that same smug grin he'd worn his entire life, the one that said, "I've already won." The lawyer cleared his throat. "This is the last will and testament of Mr. Harold Collins," he began, his voice dry and mechanical. "To my eldest son, Jacob Collins, I leave my house, my vehicles, and all personal savings." Jake leaned back in his chair, arms folded. Not even a flicker of surprise that of course he knew. The lawyer turned a page. "And to my youngest son, Ryan Collins," he paused, squinting slightly, as if double-checking what he was about to read. "I leave the contents of a small blue box located in my study." The room fell silent. My mother sniffled. Jake's smirk widened. The lawyer looked uncomfortable but continued on, finishing the rest of the document as if he wanted to get it over with. That was it. No car, no savings, no house, just a blue box. I forced a laugh, pretending I didn't care, but inside, I was burning. Jake clapped me on the shoulder as we left. "Guess Dad always said you were the sentimental type," he said, grinning. "Maybe there's a family photo in there for you." I wanted to punch him, but Dad raised me better than that. Or at least he tried to. When I got home, I went straight to Dad's study. The blue box was right where he used to keep his cigars, on the top shelf, a thin layer of dust covering it. I pulled it down, sat at his desk, and opened it. Inside was a single bent paperclip and a yellowing, sticky note that on the note, written in Dad's neat engineer handwriting, were 7 words. "Sometimes the smallest things unlock the biggest doors." That was it. No explanation, no money, just a riddle and a bent paperclip. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the thing. Then I started laughing, bitter, ugly laughter that echoed through the empty room. Jake was downstairs on the phone, probably bragging to his girlfriend about how easy it had been. I could hear him laughing too, his voice muffled through the walls. I put the paperclip in my pocket. Something about that note didn't feel random. Dad wasn't the type to be cryptic. He was deliberate. Every screw in his workshop was labeled, every drawer cataloged. If he left me this, there was a reason. But still, the anger hit me hard. Jake had always been Dad's favorite, even when he messed up, even when he crashed Dad's truck senior year and lied about it, even when he borrowed money from Dad's company and never paid it back. Dad forgave him every time. Me, I was the one who had to prove I wasn't the mistake. I ran my thumb over the paperclip again. The metal was slightly bent, shaped almost like Dad's old lockpick tool he used when he lost the keys to something. He used to joke that a paperclip can open anything if you're patient. I didn't realize how true that was yet. That night, I barely slept. I sat on my bed turning that paperclip over and over, wondering if Dad was testing me. Maybe the blue box was symbolic, some final lesson about humility. Maybe he wanted me to move on. But that didn't explain Jake's reaction at the will reading that he'd looked nervous. Not surprised, nervous. Why? The next morning, I went back to the study. The place still smelled faintly of his aftershave and old books. I pulled open drawers, looked behind picture frames, even ran my fingers under the desk ledge. Nothing. Then I saw it. His framed blueprint of the house, slightly crooked on the wall. Dad was obsessive about symmetry. That frame being tilted meant something. I took it down. Behind it was another sheet of paper, folded carefully. It wasn't a photo. It was a second blueprint, one I'd never seen before. It showed a small, windowless room off the garage that didn't appear on the regular floor plan. My heart started pounding. Dad was a builder. He designed every corner of this house himself. If he drew a hidden room, it existed. I grabbed a flashlight and ran to the garage. The walls were lined with old tools, paint cans, and a covered workbench. I started tapping along the walls, just like Dad had taught me years ago when we looked for studs, solid Solid. Hollow. I froze. I knocked again. Hollow. A hidden panel. It took a screwdriver and a lot of patience, but the wood finally came loose. Behind it was a small metal door, gray, scuffed, with a keypad lock. My heart was pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. 4 digits. No key. I didn't even think. I pulled the paperclip from my pocket, straightened it, and bent it into the shape of a hook. Dad used to show me how to trip a latch using the tension point. I pressed, twisted, prayed, and heard a soft click. The door swung open. Inside was a small safe. Not a huge one, just enough to fit a folder or two. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single manila envelope with my name written on it in Dad's handwriting. My knees actually went weak when I saw it. I tore it open. Inside were pages, printed emails, bank statements, transfer records. Every one of them linked Jake to Dad's accounts. Forged signatures, withdrawals, even blackmail messages typed out in plain text. Jake had been stealing from Dad for years. My throat went dry. Dad must have found out. And instead of going to the police, he'd let Jake bury himself in guilt. The fake the blue box, it was all part of something bigger, a game only Dad and I could finish. As I sat there, papers spread out on the concrete floor, I realized something else. The last page of the folder had another note from Dad, written in his fading handwriting. Ryan, when you find this, don't act yet. Watch. Listen. They'll show you what they fear most. I looked toward the house. Through the window, I could see Jake in the kitchen, still smiling, still pretending everything was perfect. And for the first time since the funeral, I smiled too. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of grief, but because of the noise inside my head. The truth wasn't whispering anymore. It was screaming. The folder sat on my desk like it was breathing. I couldn't stop staring at it. I read every page 3 times, and each time, the picture got clearer and darker. The first few documents were bank statements. Transfers from Dad's business accounts to one labeled J. Collins Consulting LLC that I snorted. Jake couldn't even spell consulting, right without Google. Yet he'd been wiring himself money for years under that name. It started small, $500 here, $1,200 there, then ballooned into tens of thousands. The signatures on the authorizations were clearly forged, though Jake had done his homework. The curves and pressure points mimicked Dad's penmanship almost perfectly. Almost. But there was one mistake Jake didn't notice. Dad always dotted his I with a tiny upward flick, a habit from years of drafting blueprints. Jake's were just dots. I could see it instantly. Next came the emails. The first few were businesslike, Jake pretending to request funds for marketing or project advances. But the tone changed after a while. If you don't send the money, I'll tell Mom everything about what happened in 2014. You think the insurance company wouldn't be interested in hearing from me? Sign the transfer, old man. Don't make this worse than it has to be. I felt bile rise in my throat. Jake had blackmailed him, my father, who had built everything with his bare hands, was being threatened by his own son. And the worst part? Dad never said a word to anyone. He carried that secret to his grave. I kept reading. One folder labeled 2014, Factory Fire caught my eye. Inside were photographs, charred beams, burned machines, the skeleton of a building I vaguely remembered from childhood visits. Dad had told us it was an electrical accident. But there, in the inspection notes, I saw the words accelerant residue detected. Jake that he had burned down one of Dad's smaller workshops, maybe to cover up theft or fraud, and Dad had taken the blame. I sat back in my chair and stared at the mess spread across the desk. Jake had taken money, reputation, and years of peace from Dad. And still, Dad gave him everything in his will. Except, that's what Jake thought. I looked again at the sticky note I'd kept from the blue box. Sometimes the smallest things unlock the biggest doors. The smallest thing wasn't just the paperclip. It was me. Dad knew Jake would grab everything if given the chance. The will, the money, the company. But he also knew I'd dig deeper, that I'd find this. A light drizzle started outside. It was after midnight when I finally decided to put everything back in the safe. I'd learned one thing from Dad's old stories about business. Never show your hand too early. When I slipped quietly into the garage to return the folder, I heard voices from upstairs. Jake's and Mom's that I froze halfway up the steps. "I told you not to worry," Jake said. "The lawyer handled it. Everything's mine now. Ryan's not going to make a fuss over a damn paperclip." Mom's voice was low, uneasy. "I just think it's strange. Your father loved Ryan too. Why would he leave him nothing?" Jake laughed, that same mocking sound that made my teeth clench. "Because Ryan was always the backup plan, Mom. The safe bet. Dad didn't like people who played it safe." Mom sighed. "Still, I wish he'd explained it. It feels cruel." Jake's voice dropped to a whisper, sharp and annoyed. "Cruel? You didn't complain when I covered the tax bill 2 years ago. Where do you think that money came from?" Silence. Then Mom said quietly, "Don't talk like that." But it was too late. I'd heard enough. I tiptoed back to my room, heart pounding. So Mom knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough to stay quiet. And if she'd stayed quiet then, she'd stay quiet now. The next morning, Jake was already in Dad's office, feet up on the desk, sipping coffee from Dad's mug. "Morning, little brother," he said, not even looking at me. "Going through Dad's stuff already? Or did you come to borrow gas money?" I wanted to throw the mug at his head. Instead, I smiled. "Nah, just paying my respects," I said, walking over to the bookshelf where the blue box had been. You know, Dad always hid things in plain sight. He shrugged. "Yeah, he was weird like that." Weird. That's what Jake called the man who paid his debts, covered his crimes, and let him walk away with everything. I reached for one of Dad's framed photos on the shelf. Me and Dad at a fishing dock years ago. Behind it, taped to the wall, I saw the edge of something white. Jake noticed me pause. "What's that?" he asked. I pulled it free. It was a folded letter, addressed to me. Jake frowned. "He wrote you a letter? Why didn't the lawyer give you that?" "Guess it wasn't part of the will," I said. "Funny, huh?" He shrugged and went back to his phone that I didn't open it until I was alone in my car. The letter was short. "Ryan, if you're reading this, you found the truth or part of it. Don't confront him yet. Let him believe he's safe. He'll make mistakes when he's relaxed. The real inheritance isn't money. It's understanding who people are when they think you're powerless. Love, Dad." I must have read it 10 times. Dad wasn't asking me to forgive Jake. He was preparing me for something. A bigger plan that he'd seen Jake for who he really was. And he'd left me the tools to finish what he couldn't. That night, I made a copy of every file in the folder, scanned them onto an encrypted drive, and hid the originals back in the safe. For now, I'd play along. Jake could celebrate, move into the house, brag about his success. But Dad's real message was clear. Wait, watch, strike only when it matters. And as I looked at Jake's new car gleaming in the driveway the next morning, I smiled faintly. He thought the war was over. He didn't know the battle had just begun. For a week, I played my part that I showed up at the house like everything was normal. I helped Mom with errands, nodded politely when Jake bragged about his new home, and pretended not to notice that he'd already changed the locks on Dad's office. But every time I stepped into the garage, the place Dad called his sanctuary, it felt like he was still there, just beyond reach. The smell of sawdust, oil, and old coffee lingered like a ghost that refused to leave. And ghosts, I was starting to learn, had stories to tell. I stood at Dad's workbench, fingers tracing the grooves in the scarred wooden surface. He'd spent thousands of hours here. Every tool had its place. Every screw drawer was labeled in his handwriting. Flathead, Phillips, washers, bolts, 3/8 inch only. I pulled out the bottom drawer. Empty. Strange, Dad never left a drawer empty. When I leaned closer, I noticed faint scratches along the inside edge, like something had been pulled out recently or hidden behind it. I ran my hand along the back and felt a small bump. A latch. I pressed it, and the wooden panel popped loose with a sharp click. Behind it, nestled in dust, was a small black tape recorder. My chest tightened. I remembered that recorder. It was the one Dad used to dictate notes when he was too tired to write. I used to joke that it was his second brain. I wiped the dust off, popped in the first tape, and pressed play. For a few seconds, there was only static. Then his voice. "If you're hearing this," I guess I didn't make it long enough to explain things face to face. My knees nearly gave out. I sat down on a stool, the sound of his voice cutting through the noise in my head. "Ryan, I know you'll find this. You were always the curious one. Jake's gotten himself tangled in things even I couldn't fully untangle. I try to protect the family name, but I made mistakes. Too many. You need to understand what he's done, what he's capable of. The tape clicked. Silence for a moment. Then another part started. The fire wasn't an accident. You probably guessed that. He tried to destroy records. But he left traces, just like I did. I hid what mattered under the name Lockridge. If you find that, you'll find the rest. Lockridge. The word meant nothing to me. I paused the tape and scribbled it down. Then I hit play again. Don't go to the police yet. You'll need more than what's in the safe. There's another layer. I can't write it down. Too dangerous. Trust no one. Not even your mother. She's protecting him in ways she doesn't even realize. My breath caught. Mom? The tape whirred to an end. I flipped it over and pressed play again, desperate for more. If he's reading the will right now, he's already nervous. He knows what he did. Watch his habits, when he gets quiet, when he avoids you. He's terrified of what's hidden under Lockridge. That's where you'll find me again, son. That's where you'll find the truth. The tape clicked off. I just sat there, staring at the recorder. The air in the workshop felt heavier somehow. Lockridge. I said it out loud, testing how it sounded. A name, maybe? A company? A place? I pulled my phone out and Googled it. Nothing. Then I checked Dad's old blueprints, the ones stacked in tubes under the bench. I unrolled them one by one. Designs for homes, cabins, and storage facilities. On the third roll, near the bottom corner of a design for an unfinished lakeside property, I saw it, tiny handwriting in pencil. Project Lockridge, 2017. My pulse quickened. I'd forgotten about that place. A few years back, Dad bought land out by Lockridge Lake. He'd called it his quiet project. Said he wanted to build a retreat for later years. But he'd stopped going there around the time the fire happened. I folded the blueprint, slipped it under my arm, and left the garage. By morning, Jake was already gone, probably out celebrating his new life as a rich man. Mom sat at the kitchen table, stirring cold coffee. Her eyes looked tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from years of pretending everything's fine. Morning, I said softly. She looked up. You've been spending a lot of time in that garage, she said. Looking for something? I hesitated. Just memories. She smiled faintly. Your father loved that place. Did he ever tell you about something called Lockridge? I asked. The change in her expression was instant. A flicker, barely noticeable, but I caught it. Her hands tightened on her mug. Why? She asked. I found one of his blueprints. It had that name on it. Oh. She looked down again, voice too casual. It was just a cabin project he was planning. Nothing special. I nodded, pretending to believe her. Right? Nothing special. But her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She knew. She knew what Lockridge meant. And she didn't want me near it. That night, I took Dad's old truck and drove out to the lake. The property was about 40 minutes away, down a half-paved road lined with pines. The sign at the entrance was still there. Private property, Collins Development. I parked near the gate and climbed over the chain. The cabin wasn't finished, just a frame, roof, and partial walls. But even in the half-light, I could tell Dad had been here recently before he died. Tools lay neatly stacked, tarps folded tight. Inside, it was quiet except for the sound of rain dripping through the rafters. My flashlight swept over a table covered with dusty plans, and something that made my heart stop. A locked metal case, half buried under a tarp. No combination lock this time, just a small padlock. I used Dad's old paperclip again. It took less than 30 seconds. The lock popped open with a click that echoed through the empty cabin. Inside were 2 USB drives, a leather notebook, and a stack of letters bound with string. I flipped open the notebook. Dad's handwriting again. This time more rushed, more desperate. If I'm gone, it's because he forced my hand. Jake found out I was documenting everything. The Lockridge property is my safeguard. The drives contain copies of all evidence, plus the real company financials. Keep them safe. Don't trust anyone until the time is right. My chest tightened. I looked at the USB drives. Each was labeled Lockridge_1 and Lockridge_2. I slipped them into my jacket pocket and sat down at the table, letting the rain fill the silence. Dad hadn't just hidden the truth. He'd created a trail for me to follow, and if he'd gone this far, it meant he knew what Jake was capable of. I glanced out the cracked window. The rain had stopped. The forest was still, but for a moment I swore I saw headlights in the distance, just a flash, disappearing around the bend. I froze. Was Jake following me? Or had someone else already found out that Lockridge wasn't just a name, but a secret worth killing for? By the time I got back from the lake, dawn had started to bleed through the trees. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the weight of what I'd found. 2 USB drives, a notebook full of warnings, and a new word that changed everything. Lockridge. I didn't go home. I couldn't. Not yet. I parked at a diner just off the highway, ordered black coffee, and stared at my reflection in the window. I looked older somehow, like I'd aged 10 years overnight. Dad's voice from the recorder still echoed in my head. Trust no one, not even your mother. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Mom's reaction when I mentioned Lockridge hadn't been grief. It was fear. Fear meant knowledge. And if Dad was right, Jake hadn't acted alone. Someone had helped him make that will airtight. Someone who knew the law better than either of them. That someone was Mr. Hewitt, Dad's lawyer. I'd known Hewitt since I was a kid. He was one of Dad's oldest friends. Back then, he used to bring me candy when I'd sit in his office waiting for Dad to finish meetings. But the man I saw at the will reading had looked different. Uneasy. Almost guilty. It was time to find out why. His office was in the old part of downtown, tucked between a dry cleaner and an insurance broker. When I walked in, his secretary glanced up and frowned. Do you have an appointment? No, I said, forcing a calm smile. But it's important. It's about my father's estate. Her hesitation told me everything. Mr. Hewitt's very busy. I lower my voice. Tell him it's Ryan Collins, and I found what Dad left behind at Lockridge. Her expression changed instantly. She picked up the phone without another word. Less than a minute later, Hewitt's door opened. Ryan, he said, his tone clipped. Come in. His office smelled of paper and old coffee. Files covered every surface. He gestured to the chair across from him, but his eyes darted toward the closed blinds before he spoke. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. I think I should, I replied. You were Dad's lawyer. You read that will. You must have known something was off. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back and sighed. Harold was complicated. Toward the end, he changed things several times. I followed his instructions. I slid the notebook across the desk, the one from Lockridge, then explained why he wrote this, why he said the will wasn't real. Hewitt froze. The color drained from his face. Where did you get this? From the Lockridge property, I said. Dad hid it, along with evidence of Jake's theft. You were part of this, weren't you? He rubbed his temples, whispering, Damn it, Harold. I waited, silent. Dad always said people reveal the truth when you stop trying to force it. Finally, Hewitt looked up. You don't understand, Ryan. Your brother came to me before your father passed. He said your dad was losing his memory, that he wanted to simplify the estate. He had power of attorney at the time. Everything he said checked out, medical letters, signatures, the works. I didn't know they were forged until it was too late. My pulse spiked. You're saying Jake faked Dad's medical condition? Hewitt nodded grimly. He made it look like Harold was incompetent. The will we read wasn't your father's last. There's another one, his real one, but Jake made sure it never made it to court. Where is it? I demanded. Hewitt opened a drawer, hesitated, then slid out a small flash drive sealed in a clear bag. I shouldn't even have this. Harold sent it to me months ago, encrypted, so it was a digital copy of his true will. But Jake threatened me. He said if I interfered, he'd ruin my practice. Threatened you how? Personal information, Hewitt said quietly. Old cases, private settlements. He got in my files somehow. I don't know how deep it goes. I looked at the drive. It was labeled in Dad's handwriting. H. Collins. Final will protected. Can you open it? I asked. Not here, Hewitt said. The encryption key isn't on this device. Harold told me the password would come with a paperclip. Whatever that means. The paperclip. I reached into my pocket and pulled it out, placing it on the desk between us. Hewitt stared at it, puzzled. I unfolded the metal, just as Dad had taught me years ago, and noticed a tiny etching near the curve, barely visible under the light. Numbers. 4 of them. 1914. Could that be the password? I asked. Hewitt leaned over his computer, typed it in, and after a moment, the folder opened. Inside was a single file. He clicked it. My heart hammered as Dad's signature appeared at the bottom of the screen. Digital, official, timestamped 2 weeks after the version Jake presented. And the contents, Jake's name wasn't there. Not once. Instead, Dad had left everything. House, savings, company shares to me. Hewitt whispered, "Dear God." He was telling the truth all along. I sat back, my mind spinning. Dad had outsmarted Jake. He'd created 2 wills. One public, one buried beneath layers of misdirection. He'd known Jake would manipulate the system, and he'd planned for it. But there was one problem. This will wasn't legally recognized until it was presented to probate. And to do that, I needed proof that Jake forged the other one. As I was leaving, Hewitt grabbed my arm. "Ryan," he said urgently, "be careful. If Jake finds out you have this, he won't back down quietly. He's desperate. I've seen it in his eyes." "I'm not afraid of him," I said. He looked at me sadly. "Then you don't know him like your father did." Outside, the sky was dark again, heavy with storm clouds. I walked to my truck, clutching the flash drive like a lifeline. Every instinct told me to go straight to the police, but Dad's words echoed in my mind. "Don't act yet. Watch. Listen. They'll show you what they fear most." So I drove home, hid the drive under the floorboard of my old bedroom, and waited. Jake was in the living room when I walked in, swirling a glass of scotch, feet propped on the coffee table. "Hey, little brother," he said lazily. "Where you been all day?" I smiled, forcing my voice to stay even. "Just tying up some loose ends." He raised an eyebrow. "Nothing I should know about." "Not yet," I said and walked past him. Behind me, I could feel his eyes following every step I took. He was nervous again, same look he had at the will reading. That flicker of fear Dad had promised I'd see. And in that moment, I knew exactly what my next move had to be. By the next morning, I made my decision. If Dad's real was going to mean anything, I needed proof. Tangible, legal proof that Jake forged documents, stole money, and manipulated the estate. The folder from the safe had some, but not enough. What I needed was a money trail. And there was only one man who could help me find it. Mr. Dawson, Dad's old banker at Crestwood Financial. The bank hadn't changed since I was a kid. Same brass nameplate, same polished marble floors, same faint smell of paper and ink. Dawson was in his late 50s now, heavier, balder, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. "Ryan Collins," he said, rising from behind his desk. "You look just like Harold did the first time he came in here with that company folder under his arm. I'm sorry for your loss, son." "Thanks," I said, shaking his hand. "He trusted you. That's why I'm here." He nodded slowly. "What can I do for you?" I hesitated before speaking. "I think my brother manipulated my father's accounts before he passed. I need to confirm a few transfers, confidentially." Dawson's smile faltered. "Ryan, you know I can't disclose private client records, even if it's family." "I'm not asking for full disclosure," I said, lowering my voice. "Just dates, maybe confirmation of a few things. My father left behind instructions. He wanted me to make sure everything was legitimate." At the mention of instructions, Dawson leaned back, studying me. "Harold always had backup plans," he said quietly. "You know, he once told me, if something ever happens to me, my sons will have to earn the truth." I met his gaze. "I'm ready to earn it." He was silent for a long time, then sighed. Closed the door. 10 minutes later, Dawson slid a file across the desk, one that hadn't been opened in years. "This never leaves the room," he warned. Inside were printouts of account activity from Collins Home Engineering. The same accounts I'd seen in Dad's safe, but these had additional annotations. "There," he said, pointing to a column of withdrawals from 6 months before Dad's death. "Your brother authorized these. All marked investment transfers. But here's what's strange. 2 days later, the funds were moved again into an account we flagged for suspicious activity. Offshore. Cayman Registry." I frowned. Did Dad approve that? Dawson shook his head. "No, I spoke to him personally a week later. He seemed confused, said he'd never opened any offshore accounts. That's when I knew something was wrong. He rifled through another folder and handed me a photocopy of document titled Power of Attorney, Harold Collins to Jacob Collins. The signature looked real, but something about it felt off. I compared it to the one on Dad's reel, will from the flash drive. The difference was subtle, but unmistakable. Dad's pen pressure always tapered at the end of his signature. This one ended abruptly, as if Jake had lifted the pen too fast. "Can you give me a copy of this?" I asked. "I shouldn't," Dawson said, glancing at the door. But Harold did leave me something before he passed. A letter. He opened his drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. My name was written on it in Dad's handwriting. "Ryan, if you're reading this, then you've found the banker who never forgot the truth. The numbers tell the story. Follow them. You'll see what Jake stole and what he fears losing most." Inside was also a USB stick labeled Crestwood Transfers 2017 to 2023. My pulse quickened. "You kept this?" Dawson nodded. "Harold asked me to. He said one day you'd come looking." He stood, walked to the window, and sighed. "Your father was a good man. He didn't deserve what Jake did to him. But be careful, Ryan. Money makes people reckless, and desperate men do desperate things." I thanked him, pocketed the USB, and left. The moment I stepped outside, I felt the temperature drop. Not just the chill of the wind, but that instinctive, gut-deep cold that tells you you're being watched. I scanned the street, that a black SUV idled across the road, engine running. Dark windows. No plats. For a second, I told myself it was paranoia, but as I started my car and pulled into traffic, the SUV followed, keeping just far enough behind to look casual. I took 2 right turns, then 1 left. It stayed with me. I pulled into a gas station, parked, and pretended to fill up. The SUV slowed, hesitated at the intersection, then drove off. Jake, IT had to be Jake. Somehow he knew I was digging. That night, I locked my bedroom door and opened the USB from the bank on my laptop. Dozens of files appeared, transaction histories, account logs, internal memos. Each told the same story. Jake funneled nearly $400,000 from Dad's business into shell companies over 5 years. But one line stopped me cold, that a transfer labeled Collins Holdings, trustee payment. The recipient? Hewitt Legal Trust. The lawyer. So Hewitt had been involved, at least indirectly. Whether it was blackmail, extortion, or coercion, I didn't know yet, but the web was tightening. I printed everything, labeled it meticulously, and hid the originals behind the drywall panel in my closet. Dad's old safe was good, but if Jake found it, the evidence would be gone. I couldn't risk that. 2 nights later, I caught Jake in the garage, rummaging through boxes. He jumped when I turned on the light. "Looking for something?" I asked. He straightened, forcing a laugh. "Relax, man. Just grabbing some of Dad's tools. Figured I'd clean up down here." I leaned against the doorframe. "You never cared about Dad's tools." He shrugged. "Maybe I'm trying to be sentimental. You know, honor his memory." His eyes flicked toward the corner where the hidden panel was. Too fast for most to notice, but I did. He knew. "Sure," I said. "Take what you need." He smiled thinly. "Appreciate it, little brother." When he left, I waited 5 minutes, then checked the panel. The screws around it were loose. That was the moment I stopped pretending. Dad's game was over. Now it was mine. I gathered the printed files, the flash drive, and Dad's notebook into a duffel bag. If Jake wanted a war, I'd fight it the way Dad would have, quietly, strategically, and with precision. But before I left, I slipped the paperclip back into the blue box. The same one Dad had left me at the reading. I taped a note inside it. "You should have checked the numbers, Jake. They always tell the truth." Because I wanted him to find it, that I wanted him to know I was coming. The next morning, I drove to Crestwood Bank again, not to see Dawson this time, but to meet someone else. Dad's old accountant, Linda Marin, worked in the same building. She'd handled the company taxes for 15 years and was known for having a memory sharper than any spreadsheet. When I introduced myself, her eyes softened. "I heard about your father. He was one of the good ones. I need your help," I said. "It's about Jake." Her face hardened instantly. "What did he do now?" "Maybe you should tell me. I said carefully. She sighed, looked around, then leaned closer. Jake came by here 2 months ago asking for Dad's tax records. Said the family needed copies for estate purposes. He paid cash, $5,000, to expedite everything. But afterward, I realized he didn't take the copies. What did he take? The originals, she said quietly. All of them. I felt the blood drain from my face. Why? She shook her head. You tell me. But if you're digging into this, Ryan, whatever your father was hiding, Jake didn't want anyone to find it. That night, as I drove home, I glanced again in the mirror. The black SUV was back. But this time, it didn't follow me from a distance. It pulled up right behind me, close enough for me to see my own brake lights reflected in its tinted windows. And that was when I finally realized Jake wasn't nervous anymore, that he was scared. And scared people make mistakes. The next morning, the world felt different. Maybe it was the realization that I was being watched, or maybe it was knowing that the people I trusted most were the ones who had buried my father's truth. Jake's betrayal hurt, but Mom's silence, that was starting to feel worse. I found her in the garden just after sunrise, pruning roses she never liked when Dad was alive. Her movements were slow, methodical, almost rehearsed. Morning, I said. She jumped slightly, as if I'd startled her. Oh, Ryan, you're up early. Couldn't sleep, I said, stepping closer. You? She shrugged, eyes on the roses. Your father loved these, she murmured. Said they were stubborn, but worth it. I wanted to believe that was all she was thinking about, but I could see it, the guilt flickering just behind her calm expression. I talked to Mr. Hewitt again, I said, testing her. He told me about the other will. Her pruning shears froze mid-cut. What other will? She asked too quickly. The one Dad sent him after Jake started manipulating things. The real one. She stood perfectly still. Then, finally, she said, Ryan, don't start digging up things that will only make it harder. Harder for who? Me or Jake? Her eyes snapped to mine. He's your brother. No, Mom, I said quietly. He's a thief. And Dad knew it. She exhaled, long and shaky. You don't understand. Your father didn't want the family destroyed. He begged me to keep the peace. He said, let him have what he thinks he's won. The truth will find its own way out. I took a step closer. You knew what Jake did. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't know everything, but I suspected. The late-night phone calls. The money missing from the business. Harold told me to stay quiet, that he'd handle it. I thought he did. Her voice broke. I didn't think Jake would go this far. I should have felt sympathy. Instead, I felt a hollow ache. You let him manipulate Dad until the end, I said. You could have stopped this. I was trying to protect you, she cried suddenly. Do you think he wouldn't have gone after you too? He hated how much your father trusted you. He called you the favorite when Harold wasn't around. That stunned me. The favorite. She nodded. You were the one Harold believed in, Ryan. That's why Jake wanted to destroy him. He couldn't stand being second. I turned away, running a hand through my hair. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was sickening. Dad hadn't just been betrayed by his son. He'd been cornered by both of them. Mom by silence, Jake by greed. When I looked back, Mom was crying quietly. If you go after Jake, she said, he'll drag us all down with him. Please let it go. I shook my head slowly. I can't. Dad didn't raise me to walk away. Her expression hardened. Then be careful. He's not the boy you grew up with anymore. That afternoon, I went through Dad's study again, this time with a new perspective. I wasn't just looking for hidden compartments. I was looking for signs of my mother's involvement. And I found them. Receipts. Dozens of them, buried in a drawer beneath old paperwork. Medical bills that didn't match Dad's timeline. Prescription invoices for medications he never took. Each one signed by Mom. When I cross-referenced the dates with Dad's bank transfers, I saw it. Jake had been funneling money into her account, labeling them as household care payments. She'd been receiving money from him for years. Not thousands, hundreds of thousands. I sat back in a chair, my chest tight. She hadn't just stayed silent. She'd been complicit, whether willingly or out of fear, I didn't know, but it didn't matter anymore. The betrayal wasn't just Jake's. It was hers too. That night, the house was quiet except for the creak of old floorboards. I went into the kitchen to grab water and noticed light coming from under Mom's study door. She was still awake. I listened before knocking. Her voice was soft but tense. He's starting to ask questions. I told you this was a mistake. A pause. Then a male voice replied, low and sharp. You should have destroyed those receipts when I told you to. If he finds them. I pushed the door open before I could stop myself. Jake was standing by her desk, phone in hand. They both froze when they saw me. Wow, I said, forcing calm. Nice little midnight meeting. Ryan, it's not what you think, Mom said quickly. Jake smirked. Really? Because it looks like what it always is, me cleaning up after you. Don't, I said quietly. Don't pretend you're helping anyone but yourself. He stepped closer. You think you're so smart, huh? Digging around in Dad's old crap. Let me guess, you think you found something big. I didn't answer. He grinned. You don't get it, do you? Dad wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, ones that could have destroyed the company. I covered for him. By stealing from him, I snapped. He shrugged. Call it payment for loyalty. Mom whispered, please stop, both of you. Stay out of it, I said sharply. She flinched, and for a split second, guilt hit me. But I couldn't back down now. Jake leaned in close, his voice low enough that only I could hear. If you don't drop this, you'll regret it. I stared him dead in the eyes. You should have said that to Dad before you killed him with stress. His smile faltered. Just for a second. That was enough. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. Mom stood there, trembling. What did you mean? She asked quietly. Killed him with stress. I looked at her. You knew what he was doing, Mom. You just didn't want to see the consequences. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing softly. For a long moment, I just watched her, feeling something cold settle over me. Pity, but not forgiveness. The next morning, she was gone. Her car, her clothes, her jewelry, everything. On the kitchen counter was a single envelope addressed to me. I can't watch you destroy each other. I did what I thought was right, but I was wrong. Please don't come looking for me. You deserve better than the mess we made. No signature. Just that. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it into Dad's notebook, and looked around the empty kitchen. Jake's SUV was still in the driveway. He hadn't left. He was waiting for something, maybe me to make the next move. And that's when I decided I wouldn't confront him again. Not yet that he wanted noise. I'd give him silence. Dad's kind of revenge, the kind that didn't shout or burn, the kind that ruined quietly. That night, I packed my laptop, the flash drives, and Dad's files into a single case. I wasn't sure where I was going yet, but I knew exactly what I had to do next. It was time to make sure every one of Jake's secrets saw the light of day, but not from my hands, from the people he feared most. For a long time, I thought revenge had to be loud to hurt. I was wrong. Sometimes the most damaging move is the one nobody notices until it's too late. I started by pretending to be small. Jake moved through the house like a man already crowned. He hosted contractors, updated insurance info, and walked around with that slow, please grin people get when they've never been held accountable. He called me kid, more than ever now, like a gentle reminder of who had been left out. I played along. I stopped asking questions. I even helped him move boxes into what used to be Dad's office, an act of goodwill that made him relax in ways he hadn't in months. On the surface, it looked like I had accepted the will. I told Mom I was going to step back and offered, out loud, to sign any document that would finalize Jake's control of the estate. He watched me when I said it, like a man who just swallowed a poison pill and realized it tasted sweet at first. Relief washed over him. His shoulders loosened for the first time since Dad's funeral. That was the reaction I wanted. Desperation makes people sloppy. Comfort makes people careless. While he settled into the illusion of victory, I worked quietly. The evidence on my drives and in my printed stacks was detailed, damning, and carefully organized. I made copies, encrypted, duplicated, and stashed where no single person could find them all. One set went to a secure cloud account I controlled under a fake name. Another went to an attorney friend of a friend who owed me one vague future favor. A third I tucked inside an innocuous charity envelope and mailed to the regional prosecutor's financial crimes division with a cover letter that smelled of legitimate concern, not vendetta. I didn't want to touch the system directly because Dad had always warned me that revenge through the law required patience and precision. He called it punching with evidence. I also started selectively planting little reminders that the house wasn't only his now. A neatly folded bank statement left visible on the coffee table. An account he thought was a dormant company reserve. An old insurance policy I found while tidying Dad's desk and set on the shelf so it would catch his eye. The trick wasn't to prove anything immediately. It was to make him believe artifacts of the past were showing up by accident. I wanted him to think the house, the documents, the past were surrendering themselves to chance. People who build empires on secrets hate the idea of history catching up by accident. At the same time, I nudged the right nerves in the business. Collins Home Engineering still had projects and clients. I arranged casual coffee meetings with longtime foremen. The receptionist who'd worked there before Jake ever touched a spreadsheet, and a quiet former board member who still swore by Dad's name. I didn't accuse, ever. My questions were gentle, curious, the kind someone asks when they want to understand how a machine works. Did we ever have odd expenses for Project Elmwood? Was there a special vendor Jake used a lot? Those micro-inquiries did something subtle. They put people in the mindset of looking, and they reminded them that maybe the new management wasn't the old management. One evening in particular stands out. Jake had invited a few of Dad's former colleagues over for drinks. Old war stories. Laughter, the kind of evening Jake thought would make him seem like a steward of his father's legacy. He'd asked me to say a few words. I did. I gave a quiet, well-phrased toast to Dad's standards and to the stewardship Jake promised. Men nodded, glasses clinked, and Jake beamed. After the guests left, I stayed behind to help him clear the glasses. He touched my arm in gratitude and said, "That was good, Ryan. You're doing the grown-up thing. You don't have to fight it." He sounded relieved and a little smug. That's when I slid him the dagger wrapped in velvet. Not literally. I mean the breadcrumb that would lead someone else to the bakery. While stacking the last of the glasses, I almost accidentally dropped a file folder near the wastebasket, a printed copy of one of the transfers that led to a shell company. It was innocuous, a single page among many. Jake cursed under his breath, bent to pick it up, and glanced at the name on the top. Collins Holdings, trustee payment to J. Collins Consulting, LLC. He smiled at the coincidence of seeing his own name on paper that validated his new empire. He felt safe. He tucked the paper into his jacket as he left. I had already sent the real dossier to people who could act. The accountant at the firm who could spot irregularities from afar. The banker who remembered footnotes that were never supposed to be public. And the prosecutor who had made a career out of following money. The paper Jake pocketed was a decoy. The right people had the real threads. I wanted him to stumble upon small victories that would make him complacent, confident, and ultimately careless. Like leaving a backhand login unprotected or forwarding an email with an attachment he didn't scrutinize. Over the next 2 weeks, the trap tightened without us having to lift a finger together. At first, it was finance. An auditor's email asking for clarification about an unusually large trustee payment. They phrased it politely, curiosity, not accusation. Then internal emails to the board popped up, and the tone shifted from curiosity to concern. Little things. Vendors asking why their checks bounced. A contractor calling to say he'd been informed a purchase order was invalid. Each tiny error was a pebble that became a landslide. Jake began to change. The smile became brittle. He took to pacing the office at odd hours. He asked more questions of Hewitt, and the lawyer's discomfort was visible. More importantly, it leaked. People who had once admired Jake were now watching him closely, waiting for an explanation. The arrogance that had carried him this far was now a liability. One night, he cornered me in the kitchen, voice low and hard. "You're messing with me," he said. "Who are you sending things to?" His face was flushed, a man pushing back against a current he couldn't see fully. I didn't flinch. "I'm making sure the truth gets to the right people," I said. "Dad trusted me with something bigger than money. I'm not the one who's messing up. You are." He lunged for a retort, then stopped. His hand quivered. The thing about fear is that it fills the silence with a noise only the fearful can hear. The sound of doors closing, of paths narrowing. It was the noise Dad had promised I'd hear when the time came. When the first raid happened, simple, bureaucratic, and efficient. It didn't come with flashing lights or a television crew. Investigators arrived at Collins Home Engineering with subpoenas and polite questions. The staff cooperated. The auditors took files. The bank froze accounts. Jake watched, stunned, as the empire he'd thought invincible was measured and sorted. He wanted to shout, to accuse, to use his charm, but the net had already closed. I watched him from across the room as they led an investigator through the ledger books. He was pale and small. No one cheered. No one hated him openly. They simply cared about their jobs and the truth. That, more than anything, felt like justice. Later, when an investigator asked for a list of people who had access to the accounts, a name on my prepared list was pulled forward casually. Hewitt's trust account item, the one Dawson had flagged. The little pebbles I'd set in motion were now rolling. By the time Jake realized I'd been the one to set so many of the dominoes in motion, it was too late. He still blamed me in a dozen ways, but the law and the board and the bank had other priorities: validate the paperwork, protect stakeholders, and preserve what remained. My revenge was quieter than his guilty conscience deserved, but it was meticulous, and it had Dad's fingerprints all over it. I left the room that night without a word. My hand went in my pocket and felt the paperclip bent exactly the way Dad had bent it for me. It was no longer a clue. It was a promise fulfilled. Small things do unlock the biggest doors. The trick is knowing which doors are worth opening. When the storm finally broke, it didn't come as thunder. It came as paperwork. The first notice arrived on a Tuesday morning. A thin white envelope slipped through the mail slot, addressed to Jacob Collins, Managing Director, Collins Home Engineering. Jake opened it at the kitchen table while eating cereal straight from the box. I was standing by the counter, pouring coffee, pretending not to watch. He tore it open, skimmed the first line, and froze. The spoon clattered into the bowl. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. He looked up at me, face pale. "The bank, they've frozen the corporate account. They're saying there's an investigation into fraudulent transfers." I frowned as if confused. "Fraudulent? That doesn't make sense. You handled everything by the book, right?" He stared at me, jaw tightening. Of course I did, but his tone carried no conviction. That was the first crack. Over the next week, the cracks became fault lines. A polite letter from the tax board requested a clarification on certain offshore transactions. Then the company's accountant called, panicked, saying several vendor payments had bounced and suppliers were threatening to halt shipments. The words forensic audit were uttered more than once. By the end of the second week, Jake wasn't sleeping. He'd started smoking again, pacing through the halls late at night, muttering to himself about misunderstandings and mistakes in the files. The confident swagger that had once filled every room was gone. I kept my role simple: the supportive brother, the one who asked careful questions and offered calm reassurances. "You think someone inside the company's trying to sabotage you?" I'd ask over dinner. He'd shrug, hollow-eyed. "Could be. Or maybe Dad set something up before he died." I'd sip my coffee and nod thoughtfully. "Maybe." Inside, I was almost trembling with control. Every step was unfolding exactly as planned. It's strange how quiet revenge can feel. There was no thrill, no sense of triumph, just a steady satisfaction, like finally exhaling after holding your breath for years. I checked the mail every morning now. I'd see his anxiety rise with each new envelope. IRS notifications, legal advisories, bank inquiries. He stopped opening them after a while. They piled up on the counter like white bricks, building a wall around him. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Thursday evening. Jake was sitting in Dad's old recliner, staring at the muted TV. His phone rang, and when he saw the number, his whole body tensed. He answered. "This is Jake Collins." I couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but I didn't have to. The color drained from his face. He mumbled a few words. "Yes, I understand, and we'll cooperate fully," then hung up. He sat there for a long time, motionless. Then he looked up at me. "They're coming tomorrow. Financial Crimes Division." I pretended to look surprised. "For what?" "They think I forged Dad's signature on a will." He said it so quietly I almost didn't catch it. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. He knew now. The final layer of his world was peeling away. That night, I couldn't sleep either. The rain drummed against the windows, and the house creaked with old memories. I went into the garage, the place where it had all started, and sat on Dad's workbench. The paperclip was still there, resting inside the blue box. I picked it up and rolled it between my fingers. Sometimes the smallest things unlock the biggest doors, Dad had written. I smiled faintly. You were right, old man, I whispered, because that tiny clue had unlocked everything. The truth, the betrayal, and the quiet justice that was finally closing in. The next morning, 2 black sedans pulled up to the driveway. Suit stepped out, crisp and polite. Jake tried to put on his businessman face, but the sweat on his temples betrayed him. Mr. Collins? One of them said. We have some questions regarding irregularities in your company's financial records and estate documentation. He stammered something about legal misunderstanding and reviewing paperwork. They nodded patiently, handed him an official notice, and asked him to accompany them downtown for questioning. Moments later, he turned to me. You did this, he hissed. I met his gaze evenly. No, Jake, you did this. Dad just made sure I could prove it. He wanted to hit me. I saw it in the twitch of his jaw. But he didn't. He just shook his head and followed the agents out to the car. When the door closed and the cars pulled away, the silence in the house was deafening. For the first time in years, it felt calm. Over the next few days, the story spread quietly through the community. Nothing made the evening news, but whispers carried fast in small towns. Client pour le contract. The board suspended Jake pending investigation. Bank accounts froze permanently. Mom called once from wherever she'd run off to. She sounded tired, almost relieved. I heard about Jake, she said softly. What happens now? I don't know yet, I said. The investigators have everything. The truth will handle itself. Be careful, she said after a pause. Sometimes justice leaves scars too. Maybe, I replied, but at least they're honest scars. 3 weeks later, I got a call from Mr. Hewitt, the lawyer. They've authenticated your father's digital will, he said. It's legitimate, legally binding. Once the courts finish reviewing the forged version, the estate will revert to you. I didn't say anything for a moment. Ryan, he continued, Harold would have been proud of how you handled this. Quietly, carefully. That's how he wanted it. Yeah, I said softly. He always did believe in patience. After I hung up, I went into the study. The afternoon light poured across Dad's desk. I opened the blue box one last time and placed the paperclip back inside. Then I closed the lid and whispered, Doors unlocked, Dad. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't over. Jake wasn't the kind of man to go down without a fight. He'd built his life on manipulation, and people like him always look for one last angle, one last lie to hide behind. And sure enough, a few days later, an envelope arrived, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, scrawled in Jake's handwriting. You think this is over? You don't know everything Dad hid. Some of his secrets are bigger than me. I read it twice. Then I smiled, because if there really was more, I was ready. The game had started with a paperclip. It wasn't ending until every secret my father left was finally dragged into the light. I didn't open the envelope again. I slid it into the desk drawer and let it sit there like a live wire. Whatever Jake thought he still had over me, I could deal with later. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling someone else's shadow pressing on my chest. But quiet has its own way of uncovering what noise hides. The night after Jake's arrest, I couldn't sleep. The rain returned, a steady whisper on the roof. The house smelled like dust and old paper. Everything felt both familiar and distant, like I'd stepped into a replica of the life I'd lost. I went to the garage, always the garage, and sat on the edge of Dad's workbench. The recorder I'd found weeks earlier was still there. I hadn't touched it since the Lockridge tapes. On impulse, I turned it over and pressed play. Static, then a click. If you're hearing this, Dad's voice began, soft, tired. Then you've already figured out what Jake's done. I froze. This was new. I recorded this after he came here the last time. He thought I didn't know he was siphoning money. He came to threaten me, to make sure I signed a power of attorney so he could handle things while I was sick. He said he'd protect the company's name. He lied to my face. I signed nothing. He forged everything. And when I found out, I realized something, Ryan. You can't save someone who's proud of his own lies. His voice cracked there. I heard him cough, the sound harsh and dry. But I also realized you can't teach truth by giving it away. You have to make someone earn it. That's what this is. You were always patient. You watched, you listened. I built this trap for him, but it was never meant to destroy him. It was meant to reveal him. The tape paused, then continued, quieter now, as if he'd leaned closer to the microphone. I left the paperclip for a reason. You used to watch me open safes with one. I wanted you to remember. Simple things solve complicated problems if you keep your hand steady. I knew you'd look beyond the surface. I trusted you to finish what I started. I sat there with the recorder humming in my hand. It felt less like a revelation and more like a conversation we should have had years ago. The next part came with a long sigh. There's something else you need to see. I left a file in the Lockridge case. An old USB I labeled archive. It's not about the money. It's about the truth. I felt my pulse pick up. I remembered seeing 2 drives in the Lockridge box. Lockridge_1 and Lockridge_2. I'd only checked the first. I grabbed a second one and plugged it into my laptop. There was a single folder called Archive. Inside, a video file named confession.mp4. My breath caught as the screen flickered. Dad sat at his desk, thinner than I remembered, face lined with exhaustion. He looked directly at the camera. If anyone ever questions what happened with my estate, he said, let this be my testimony. My son Jacob forged my signature. He's been embezzling from the company for years, and he threatened to expose false safety violations to blackmail me. Everything is documented. He picked up a folder, the same manila one I'd found in the safe, and held it up. I've reported this privately to my lawyer and banker. They know what to do if I'm gone. And if you're seeing this, Ryan, it means I trusted you to carry it through. He smiled then, small, proud, a little sad. Don't waste your life hating him. Hate doesn't fix things. Integrity does. When all this is over, rebuild what's worth saving. Not for me, for you. He hesitated, looking away for a second, then back. You always ask me why I never punished Jake when he messed up. The truth is, I thought I could still teach him. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I just didn't want to admit my firstborn had learned nothing from me. But you did. That's why the company and my legacy belong to you. He reached off-screen and returned holding the blue box. If you still got this, good. Keep it. The paperclip isn't just a symbol. It's made from the first wire I ever bent when I built my first prototype. It's what started everything. Then, softer. I'm proud of you, son. The screen went black. I didn't realize I was crying until I saw drops splatter the keyboard. For months I'd been fueled by anger, cold, precise, functional anger, but hearing his voice like that cracked something open. It wasn't vengeance anymore. It was closure. I sat there for hours replaying parts of the tape, memorizing the cadence of his voice. When morning light finally pushed through the window, the anger was gone, replaced by a calm I hadn't felt in years. The next step wasn't revenge, it was restitution. That afternoon, I met with Hugh and Dawson at a small conference room downtown. I showed them the video. Neither spoke until it ended. Then Dawson leaned back, eyes glassy. I knew he had something like this, he said quietly. Harold always prepared for the worst. Hewitt wiped his glasses. This is more than enough. Once the court verifies this, Jake's case will collapse. The assets, the company, everything goes back where it should. Will he go to prison? I asked. Hewitt sighed. That depends. The evidence points to fraud and coercion. But with cooperation, maybe probation. It's not our call. I nodded slowly. I don't want him destroyed. Just exposed. They both looked at me, surprised. I didn't explain. I didn't have to. Dad's voice still echoed in my head. Don't waste your life hating him. When I got home, the house was empty again. I walked through each room, remembering how it used to sound when Dad coughed from his office, when Mom hummed in the kitchen, when Jake laughed before everything curdled. I went into the study and sat at the desk. The sun poured across the paperclip on the shelf, and I realized how much that tiny piece of metal had changed my life. The phone rang once, unknown number. I answered anyway. Ryan, Jake's voice. Hoarse, thin, smaller than I'd ever heard it. I wanted to say he hesitated, I didn't mean for things to go that far. I thought I could fix it before anyone found out. You have to believe me. I closed my eyes. I believe you thought that. But that's not the same thing. Silence stretched between us. Then he said, "They're offering me a deal if I cooperate." "I'm taking it." "Good," I said. "Are you happy now?" "No," I said softly. "But Dad would be." He didn't answer. The line went dead. That night, I walked out to the garage one last time. I cleaned Dad's workbench, polished his tools, and placed the recorder beside the blue box. I locked both in the safe, not to hide them, but to preserve them. Then I switched off the light and stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the house. It no longer felt haunted. The investigation wrapped faster than anyone expected. Once Dad's video surfaced, the lies collapsed in on themselves like a burned-out house. Jake's lawyer arranged a plea deal. No trial, no spectacle. He admitted to forgery, embezzlement, obstruction. The court granted leniency in exchange for full restitution and cooperation with financial authorities. His company shares reverted to the estate. His accounts were liquidated to repay debts. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like silence after a long, ugly argument, the kind where no one really wins. The morning the judge finalized the decision, I drove to Crestwood Bank with Hewitt. Dawson met us in the same small office where I'd once begged for answers. He placed a set of papers on the desk. Estate of Harold Collins. Amendment of beneficiary. My name was there, not as consolation, but as rightful heir and executor. "This is what your father intended," Dawson said. "It's officially yours now." I nodded, signing where they pointed. When the last signature dried, Hewitt smiled faintly. "Your father's legacy is safe, Ryan. What happens next is up to you." For days, I couldn't bring myself to step inside Dad's company. Collins Home Engineering had always been more than a building. It was his mind turned into blueprints and steel. When I finally walked through the doors, the smell hit me first: metal, sawdust, oil. Familiar. The workers paused when they saw me, uncertain whether to offer condolences or congratulations. I called everyone into the conference room. Most had worked for Dad longer than I'd been alive. Their faces carried a mix of exhaustion and hope. "I'm not here to erase what came before," I told them. "I'm here to rebuild what was lost. We're keeping the name. We're keeping Dad's standards. But we're also going to remember how quickly trust can break." There was a silence, then soft nods around the table. For the first time in years, the room felt steady again. At home, I started clearing the remnants of Jake's life from the house. His suits, his files, his perfume-heavy cologne bottles gone. I boxed them up and left them at the door. When a courier arrived to collect his remaining belongings, I handed over the boxes without a word. He sent one letter from a halfway house weeks later. The writing was messy, apologetic, and full of the kind of regret that comes after losing everything. He said he wanted to start fresh somewhere else. I didn't reply. Some chapters need to stay closed. Mom eventually came back. Not immediately. She called first. "Is it safe?" she asked, her voice fragile. "It's over," I said. When she returned, she stood in the doorway like a stranger visiting a museum of her own mistakes. We didn't talk about Jake. We didn't have to. The silence between us carried too much history to fill with words. Over time, though, that silence softened. I caught her humming again while cooking. She spent more time in the garden. I started visiting her after work, bringing coffee, small talk, little pieces of normal life. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was healing. One evening, I found myself back in the garage, sitting on Dad's stool, turning the paperclip between my fingers. The light above the bench flickered like it always had. I'd never replaced the bulb. The recorder and the blue box sat side by side, exactly where I'd left them. I thought about everything that tiny object had unlocked: secrets, lies, and finally peace. I remembered Dad's words. Sometimes the smallest things unlock the biggest doors. He hadn't just meant safes or secrets. He meant patience, restraint, the willingness to wait until truth opened the door itself. I framed the paperclip later that week. It sits on the wall of my new office, above a small brass plaque that reads, "Integrity is its own inheritance." The company began to thrive again. I promoted people who had been loyal to Dad and gave them the credit they deserved. We took smaller projects at first, steady, practical work. Each success felt like another piece of him restored. Clients came back. Investors followed. At the first board meeting I chaired, I played the opening minute of Dad's confession video. Not for drama, but as a reminder. We don't forget where we come from, I told them. We don't rewrite history to make ourselves comfortable. No one argued. They just nodded. Some even smiled. Months passed. The investigation faded into memory. Life resumed a quiet rhythm. One afternoon, as the sun slanted across my office, I caught a glimpse of movement outside. Someone leaving a small parcel with my name on it. I waited until the car drove away before picking it up. No return address. Inside was a small envelope. A note read, "Found this in Dad's old files. Thought you should have it. G." Inside the envelope was a photo. Me and Jake as kids, standing in a half-built frame of what would become Dad's first big project. We were grinning, holding matching paper clips like trophies. Dad had written on the back, "2 sons, 1 foundation." I set the photo on my desk. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anger. Just a kind of gentle sadness that comes when the wound stops bleeding but never fully disappears. The next weekend, I drove to Lockridge Lake. The unfinished cabin still stood there, quiet among the trees. I fixed the roof, swept out the dust, and replaced the cracked window panes. It became my refuge, a place to think, to build, to remember that I placed a framed copy of Dad's blueprint on the wall, and beneath it, the letter he'd written me. The real inheritance isn't money. It's understanding who people are when they think you're powerless. He was right. Sometimes I still hear Jake's voice in my head, the way he laughed when he thought he'd won. The sound doesn't sting anymore. It's just an echo of who he was before he learned what consequences feel like. And sometimes when the night is quiet and the air smells like rain on wood, I swear I can hear Dad humming in the distance, the way he used it while fixing engines in this very garage. I like to think he's proud, not because I got revenge, but because I finally understood him. I lock up the garage every night, the blue box resting safely on the shelf. It's still empty except for that single bent paperclip. That's all it ever needed to hold. The smallest things unlock the biggest doors. He was right about that. The paperclip opened more than a safe. It opened a life. And the door it unlocked will never close again. Thanks for staying with me to the end of this story. If you love stories where betrayal meets poetic justice, make sure you subscribe, hit like, and share your favorite moment below. Until next time, remember, patience isn't weakness. It's the sharpest form of revenge.